It was I reached out to God in a moment of absolute disparity where I was drug addicted and I didn't know where else to turn. And the Lord immediately overnight set me free from drug addiction, from opiate-based drug addiction and marijuana and other drugs that I was using every single day. The Lord set me free from that overnight. No withdrawals, none of that stuff. I just knew that my life, the one that I was living, was incompatible with the life that I wanted. There was a moment, I know where I was standing, I was talking to the Lord, and I just remember so clearly, for the first time in my life, having hope for a better life.
So welcome back to Pastor Talks. We're here today to talk about an important topic on discipleship and what is real discipleship and why is it something that is actually not happening for a lot of Christians. And John's here with me once again.
Good morning.
With his Dadalorian shirt, which was a good choice.
It's Father's Day present.
Right. Yep. And why don't we start, man, with you just sharing how discipleship has impacted you? Like, what's your story with it? Like, I know you came from a background that was completely the opposite of what a Christian life looks like. I don't know if you want to speak to that too, but when you came into the kingdom, what did discipleship look like for you?
So I was very much a blank slate when it came to Christianity. I wasn't raised in any kind of a Christian home or anything like that, and had only set foot in churches for like weddings and funerals. I had never read the Bible. I was such a blank slate. I share this story, and it's kind of embarrassing, but I share this story. I remember after I got saved, I was at a church, and I was listening to the sermon, and he said, turn to the book of Acts. And I had a Bible with me, and so I'm like flipping through this book, and I cannot find Acts anywhere. And the reason is because I heard him say A-X-E, Acts.
Acts.
And
like
so
the
I'm
body
looking,
spray.
Yeah, so I'm looking for like
the book of Acts.
The book of Acts, like I'm, throwing an axe or something. And that's how much of a blank slate I was when it came to Christianity.
Okay.
And I
so
do
you
believe,
had no knowledge of the Bible at all?
No, none, not at all. In fact, when I first started reading the Bible, I started in Genesis. And I was reading it as if I would read any other book, where you just, obviously you start at the beginning and you just read it like, and in your mind you're thinking, or at least I was thinking, this is chronological. And it can be a little deceiving because, I read through Genesis, which is chronological. You read through Exodus, it's chronological. And then you finish off the rest of the Pentateuch, and it's chronological, but there's a lot of stuff in there that can be confusing, that it started to throw me a little bit. And then once you finish the Pentateuch, it seems to jump to other characters and other situations. And by the time I got to the prophets, I was completely lost. I mean, you get through, Chronicles and you just have no idea who these characters are, what the setting is, why is this relevant, where is Jesus? I'm literally reading the Old Testament, and I'm going to a church, a Christian church, where they're consistently preaching about Christ, and I'm, it's taken me like a month and a half to get to Chronicles or to get to the prophets, and I still haven't even heard the name Jesus. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how wet behind the ears I was. Like, I didn't even understand basic stuff about Christianity. And it wasn't until I went to a men's retreat. So this went on for years.
No, wait, but a broadcast led you to this? You're saying you were watching something and they said turn to the book of Acts?
No, I was at a church.
Oh, you were at a church? I was at a church. What led you going to church?
Oh, that's part of my testimony. That's like a whole long story of how I got saved and went to church.
I guess to save time.
But it wasn't that somebody preached the gospel to me. It was I reached out to God in a moment of absolute disparity where I was drug addicted and I didn't know where else to turn. And the Lord immediately overnight set me free from drug addiction, from opiate-based drug addiction and marijuana and other drugs that I was using every single day. The Lord set me free from that overnight. no withdrawals, none of that stuff. And my prayer was, Lord, if you help me get sober, Lord, I'll go to church. I mean, I was like, I don't even know what I'm praying to or who I'm praying to.
Right.
And I woke up sober. And so I had this agreement that I had to start going to church. And I actually followed through with it. And so I started going to, a church which was a charismatic church. But I didn't know what a charismatic church was. I literally knew one person in my life who went to church. And I just called him and asked him if I could go with him. And so I started going to church like every week. And I loved it. I really did. I viewed it as like really good environment. And I was sober for, about 3 or 4 months following that sort of conversion experience. But because I hadn't been discipled, I was still doing like all the same behaviors.
And you were also confused about what you were reading in the Bible. You're kind of like, what does all this mean?
Yeah, I'm reading the Bible at home, and then I'm going to church, and I'm trying to absorb what they're saying, but it felt like it was two different stories because I didn't understand the Old Testament in light of the New Testament. I didn't understand even where Jesus was if you open up a Bible and you're just kind of reading through. In fact, I only made it to Isaiah before I just stopped reading the Bible. It was so confusing to me. And I just felt like for weeks I was just reading words on a page that didn't make any sense to me. And pretty quickly, I eventually started to drift back into my old lifestyle, my old nature, my old behavior. And that went on for, a few years. I ended up going back to drugs. I ended up having more issues. And it wasn't until I found this church. So this is not the church that I was going to originally, but when I found this church, I remember going to a men's retreat. And even that, it just feels like an act of the Holy Spirit because I've no reason why I would even go to a men's retreat. But I just found myself there, and they had this whole presentation on discipleship and like what it is and why it's so important for your Christian walk. And I had been a Christian for a couple years at this point, but you wouldn't know it other than the fact that I went to church like every Sunday, like never missed.
So you were still going. I
was still going to church, but I was still getting high. I was still had a girl living with me in my house, and my life looked pretty identical as it did a few years prior, even though I had initially gotten sober for about 3.5 months.
So it's like God knew what you were missing. You didn't know what you were missing. So when you got connected to this church, they had a men's retreat, and then they taught you what discipleship looked like and what it was.
Yeah, and I immediately was like, I need that. How do I sign up? Who do I talk to? Like, what do I do with that?
Right.
And I was, and this is going to get to a little of my frustrations with discipleship. It's one of the reasons why I think we're having this podcast, is because there's a lot of people who either aren't being discipled or maybe they did it like one time in the past, and then they like don't make disciples. Which to me, I'm going to tell you a story, and this is like a mind-blowing story to me. After I left that men's retreat, I found 3 guys in this church, men in this church, who were all over the age of like 50. They were either deacons or elders. And I approached them and asked them, like point blank, will you disciple me? Like, this is, I've never been discipled, will you disciple me? And 2 of them said no. Like it hurts my head to even like...
Did they tell you why?
Think about that. I don't remember the one said he was just too busy.
Okay.
Which I'm not sure what could be more important than that. Like, to me as a pastor now, the one thing that like would make me so fulfilled in my job and so happy and so excited if somebody would just come to me and say, I need discipled. Please disciple me.
Right.
But it's like that is what every pastor wants. It's like every pastor's dream. And I know that these people weren't pastors, but they were leaders in the church.
Ah, okay.
And I just remember so clearly that 2 of them actually said no.
Yeah.
And I just look back and I just think that it's like, it hurts my head. It's just like blows my head up,
Yeah.
But the third said yes.
One said yes.
One said yes. And of course, if you know my story, the details of it, obviously that was God ordained. I mean, This guy met with me weekly, sometimes multiple times a week for years.
Yeah. And what did you guys do when you met? Like how did that look?
So at first, I think that he was pretty cautious with me because he didn't know me very well.
Okay.
So we'd meet at coffee shops or we would stay after church and I would just ask questions and he would give me things to read. And I mean, I just had a ton of questions. And anytime he couldn't answer one of my questions, he was a deacon at the time. Anytime he couldn't answer one of my questions, he would refer me to the senior pastor, he would refer me to Tom. And so then I started meeting with Tom about once a month or so, asking some of those deeper questions.
Yeah.
But within about a month or two, he started inviting me over his house. And like I said, I think he was just testing the waters, make sure I wasn't crazy. And because he had a lot of kids, he has 10 kids, and I think 8 of them were still living at home at the time, or 7 of them were still living at home at the time.
Gosh, I have no idea who you're talking about.
Well, if you go to this church, now. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But he really was modeling for me appropriate, male behavior, appropriate adult male behavior, appropriate, husband behavior, appropriate father
as opposed to what you learned in the world your whole life.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing.
Everything
you don't just know what that looks like.
He was modeling things for me.
Yeah.
And I just remember having conversations with him about ideal, Christian life, about like abortion and about, what it means to, try to avoid sin and try to be pure, and what it means to, be responsible in life. Just all these things that nobody had ever taught me. And I know that some people receive that from their earthly father, but I never did. Yeah. Some stuff, I'm not going to say as a complete absolute statement. I obviously got some things from my earthly dad, but really this guy became a spiritual father to me.
That's awesome.
And it totally changed my life. I mean, within a few months of meeting with him, I got sober for the last time, and I did it willingly, and because I just knew that my life, the one that I was living, was incompatible with the life that I wanted.
Right.
And I had hope for a better life too. That's the other thing that I just cannot emphasize enough. I remember so clearly there was a moment, I know where I was standing, I was talking to the Lord, and I just remember so clearly, for the first time in my life, having hope for a better life. All this stuff that I'd been reading about, all this stuff that I had been actually seeing at his house, it all of a sudden clicked, and I just realized I could actually have that. It may take me 10 years to get it.
Yeah.
But it's actually possible.
Yeah.
And it's incompatible with the life that I'm living right now. So the life that I wanted, that I had hoped for, is incompatible with the stuff that I'm doing now.
Right.
And so something had to change.
Yeah.
There's like this groundbreaking moment for me, but none of that would have happened without this intentional discipleship relationship that I have.
Right, which is part of why you're so passionate about it, is because you experience the fruit of it.
Right.
And you know that other people need it.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. You reminded me of a verse that Paul, he's writing to I think it's to the Corinthians, which if you've seen our podcast, you'll know that we are not very good at citing these verses.
We don't have the Bible memorized.
Yeah, but okay. But the thing is, he said you would have over 1,000 instructors, but you don't have many fathers. And a lot of times people look to teach, but they don't know how to father. You found a father.
Right.
And it's important that when we disciple, that we are able to be spiritual fathers and mothers. There's a place for teaching, obviously, but it sounds like that's what impacted you the most, was that he actually played a part that was lacking in your life.
Well, and you have to keep in mind too that over the years I've learned that not all discipleship looks like sort of like a spiritual father sort of power differential.
Right, it's not every
iron
situation.
Sharpens iron. I mean, me and you kind of disciple each other.
Yeah.
Iron sharpens iron.
That's a good point.
It looks different for different seasons in your life.
Yeah.
And the Lord brought me somebody in my life that fit the role exactly for what I needed in that moment. Yeah.
So it's not always that, but that is important at the same time. So I'm going to segue into my story from that, okay? Because we have a similar story, actually, that when I got saved, I came out of a lifestyle for 25 years in the world without, a father figure that was showing me what this looks like in the church.
Yeah.
And I got fortunate enough to be saved through a revelation of the finished work of Christ. So I had a more complete understanding of who I was now, because God used that to help bring me out of my addiction. And
you at least had a couple of books.
Oh yeah, I had a bunch. Well, a guy sent them to me who met me on the streets.
Yeah.
And they were, I got sent Graham Cook. How fortunate am I to be able to get Graham Cook?
Yeah, and so that kind of discipled you, at least early on.
Oh yes.
Whereas I had
well, that's
none
the
of
thing.
It. Yeah.
I was discipled in my apartment.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I didn't understand something that I found out. And this is funny. When I got saved, I had an encounter with God, and the encounter was exhilarating because I was brought up in the Bible Belt, and religion, and by religion, I mean this sense of legalism that doesn't have a good view of God or who we are in God.
Right.
And so I always thought God was quite judgy and had a real problem with humanity, and penal substitution view was prominent where I grew up and things like that. But when I got saved, I thought, oh my gosh, dude, God's amazing. I bet the Christians know this. My mistake was I went to church optimistic. Like I found a church with some friends like that I had. They were like, come to my church. I went to the church and the pastor it was like maybe 200 people. And the pastor was looking at me quite a few times because I was the only person in there with this look of who are you professing to know?
Yeah.
Like his whole sermon was like, he was yelling at people. Like he was like, there's this teaching going around that you can be happy and be a Christian, and it's not true. And I was like, have you met Jesus? Dude, listen, he didn't even affect me because I was so baptized in who God was from my encounter that it was like water off the shoulders. But I was horrified that this is Christianity. And then when I was at college, I was talking to some friends who were Christian, and they were very concerned for me because I had such an excitement about the finished work of Christ. I'm like, can you believe it? I'm not a sinner anymore. I'm a saint. And they're like, no, hold on. We need to no, actually, we're all sinners, And I was like, where are you getting your information? And we talked a little bit about that in one of our podcasts. But the point is that the sad thing is, I got traumatized after coming to Christ because even the people that I hung out with that were really cool, like I hung out with some Calvinists. I didn't even know what Calvinist was when I hung out with them, but they would smoke cigars, so I thought that was cool. So we would go smoke cigars and talk about Jesus. And those guys started coming down on me because of the people I was listening to. I didn't realize that like Graham Cook and John Crowder and all these guys get so persecuted in the church. And when people are cessationists especially and religious, they judge anything of the Spirit. Right. And I just met the Spirit. I got filled with the Spirit, and they're going, you're deceived. And I had a guy tell me right after I got saved, he said, you're going to do more damage to your soul by following that teacher than you ever would have done when you were on drugs.
Wow.
I'm like, are you kidding? And and essentially what it was an immediate attack against what God was doing and what God was showing me, and it was coming from the church.
And it's interesting because everybody seems to want to disciple you in exactly what they believe.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what Paul was talking about in Corinthians, where he's saying, who are you following? Are you following me or Apollos? We follow Christ.
Yeah.
You need to follow Christ.
We plant, we water, but Christ gives the increase.
Yeah. And people always want you to follow their set of interpretations.
Yeah.
Rather than turning to the scriptures.
Or what's even more
themselves.
scary is they don't really know God.
Could be.
I mean, if they're telling me that the God who I know, who I encountered, isn't God, that tells me that you don't know God.
Yeah, and I think that so many people do it also with good intentions.
I know.
I think that they're
they meant it well.
Yeah, they're
that's all they've known.
Concerned about
I have empathy for them now.
Yeah.
At first, I was extremely, upset, and it was weird. But let me just say this: that led to me being outside of the church for 8 years as a new believer.
I remember,
because I could not find a church that I felt comfortable in. I became afraid of church because everything that I met with the Lord that was so precious to me was actually not being taught in the majority of the churches that I went to, and it was really difficult. But here's where we have something in common. I actually got discipled outside of the church while I was outside of the church. So I had a person come into my life, which ended up becoming my father-in-law. So we have a very, very strong similarity in that. And he taught me the things that I didn't understand, but he had a revelation of the gospel. So he was able to help me with the things that I was struggling with, but he was giving me actual truth, and I grew a lot in those times. I still had trouble with slipping back into some behaviors, and he would disciple me in what God showed me from the beginning, which is you have a new identity. This is the truth of who you are. This is who God is,
So what did discipleship look like for you in those times?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It looked like me coming deeper into a revelation of who I really am, but it wasn't alone. Because I came to this place where I thought, this is going to end up being something that I have to do on my own, because I didn't trust the church to be able to do it. Wow. Then I end up meeting you, and you're like, dude, you got to go to church. And I'm like, no. I'm like, I don't want to go to church because I've been there and they are, and you just kept on, telling me you need to go to church. And I ended up finding a church. Okay. And in many cases, I have flourished through being at the church that I was at. Okay. My first church. The only thing that did occur, and this is where I want to segue, because discipleship can be a good thing, but it can also become a problem if it's not the way that it should be, if it's not biblical and if it's not healthy. So one of the things that I experienced in the church that I was in was that there was a very healthy embrace when it came to processing emotions, processing feelings, processing things that maybe I've been through in my past that I needed to work through, okay? But where it was lacking was there wasn't a solid place for identity. There wasn't a place that was already settled where this is who you are now, even though you're experiencing these things. So what ended up happening was, as I started to embrace the different things I needed to process in my life, I started to lose a sense of who I really was. And it became hard for me to be able to face some of these things without identifying myself with those things. Are you following me?
Yeah, I mean, I remember you during that season, you were telling me that they were wanting you to focus more on trying to almost like unearth your old nature and like, process your old nature, and like, hey, you need to go back to your childhood and unearth all of this stuff. But what has been helpful for you, I remember after you sort of came out of that, you said, what I need is people to see the truth in me. They need to call out my new nature, my new identity, rather than focusing too much on the old nature.
Yeah, so like you said, there's a place for processing, but it has to be rooted in the gospel. It has to be rooted in the truth. So
of your new nature.
Yeah, and what that did was it actually backtracked me. Yeah. Because I started to identify with who I was instead of who I am. And that's where discipleship can get weird. Like let's just define this. I'm going to tell you what I think discipleship is, and I would love to hear what you think, and we're going to get into a few things. But to me, what discipleship is and what people need is when you get saved, you're brought out of one kingdom and you're placed into another one. And you don't know what that looks like necessarily, and you need to know, and you need to see it modeled. But the other thing is that Jesus calls you by a new name. You have a brand new nature. You have a brand new identity. But not everything in your mind or in your emotions or in your will is automatically in alignment with that. So what we need to be, to me, discipleship is actually being in relationship with people from the foundation of who God says they now are. And if we are in relationship with people that way, and we understand that because we're not under law, we're under grace, that you're coming into this with a mess. And I know you're afraid to share it. But if you can trust that I'm not going to judge you for the sins that you're struggling with, and even more, I'm not going to see you as who you were. Now you've got a chance. Now you actually have a chance to process what's disordered in your life through the revelation of grace and through the revelation of who you are in Christ. To me, that is healthy discipleship. If we don't have a foundation of being under grace, and if we don't have a foundation of forgiveness, past, present, and future, and a new identity, then we're not going to be able to help people get to where God's calling them to be.
So it reminds me kind of what you're talking about. I don't know, I'm just because it's in the forefront of my mind, I'm going through and I'm studying different parts of the French Revolution in history. And so I was studying, yeah. And
If it's, I thought it's actually
hobby,
not the Roman Empire.
as a hobby,
time.
yeah,
Okay.
just as a hobby. But what happened with Marie Antoinette when she became queen is they actually had this sort of ceremony where she was leaving her old homeland, and when she came into France, there was this one small little house where she entered in, and she was wearing her old, sort of traditional garb from, her clothes and all this stuff from when she was in her old nature, in her, she enters into this house and she has to completely change. She has to wear French clothes from now on. She has to speak French. She has to learn the customs. And when she came out the other side, it had two doors. When she came out the other side, they said to her, "You're French now. Like, you're not this person who you were when you entered into this. Now you're French." Mm-hmm. And so she literally had a team of people, a couple in particular, whose sole job it was to teach her how to be French. She was discipled from that moment on to be French.
Yeah, yeah.
And
what was she before?
I can't remember. I think it was like Austrian or something.
Austrian.
It was
so
one
part
of those.
part of their method is, oh, you forgot that you're not Austrian, and we're here to remind you that you're French.
Yeah. So I mean,
let's
they
work
would
on
live
that.
with her. They would
Yeah.
live with her in Versailles, and they were basically to instruct her on
Exactly.
everything French.
Yeah.
She was no longer, and that's what they said. Like, you're not allowed to be this person that you were,
Right.
and that is not who you are anymore.
Right,
You're
right,
French.
right.
And so it just reminds me of, like, that's kind of like you were saying. You're leaving one kingdom and you're entering into a new kingdom.
Yes.
And you have people around you to remind you of the customs, to remind you of who your new nature is.
Yes.
And you're even wearing different clothes. Like, that's, Paul uses this analogy of you throw off your old clothes and you wear on, you put on the new
And
garb.
in between that, he always
Yeah.
says, be renewed in your mind.
Yeah.
That we
And-
need to align with it, because we've got a lot of faulty thinking.
But she had
Yeah.
a team of people who lived with her in Versailles.
Yes.
That discipled
So
her
she
into
couldn't do
that.
it alone.
She couldn't do it alone.
Okay, one of the first things God told Adam, or said, I don't know if he said it directly, but he said, it is not good that man should be alone. I heard someone teach on that, and they said, most of us have this idea that if we have God, we have everything. Now, in a sense, that's
Totally
true.
isolated.
But Adam and God had perfect relationship.
Right.
And he still
It was before the fall.
said, it's not good for man to be alone. So there is something in community that is necessary for our growth. We can't do it alone.
Right.
And that's something that's interesting. And yeah.
I just want to add, in terms of defining discipleship, I think it's really important to understand, yes, it has to take place in the context of a biblical community, a biblical, relationships.
Yeah.
But it also is a lifelong endeavor.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that so many people get tripped up on, because I think especially in evangelical churches, there's this belief that you get saved and you're baptized and then you're discipled one time. You're discipled, and then
you've
somehow
got
through
it.
this process of discipleship that you achieve whatever it is that you're aiming to achieve,
Yeah.
and then you don't need to be
Yeah.
discipled again. You don't need those kinds
That's
of...
crazy. The only
And it
way
is
someone
crazy.
the only way that someone could have that belief is if they believed that discipleship was purely knowledge.
That's a good point.
And it's not knowledge. It's not just knowledge. It's some knowledge.
Of course.
But relationship is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Because that's where we've been most broken, is through relationships. So in relationships, we have to become more whole. And God set it up that way, even with him. We can know who we are all day, but if we don't experience the Father speaking it and empowering it, we're not going to be it. We have to have both.
Yeah.
Knowledge has to meet experience.
It's interesting. I've never heard you say it like that, because we've talked about stuff like this before, and I think
I'm just now starting to realize it more and more.
No, I think I'm going to use that in one of my. I'm sure at some point, because it is a. I mean, I think that you made a
It's like,
real
okay,
good
now
connection.
you know this, and
Yeah,
now you know that.
now you
okay,
know the
good
Bible,
student,
you
good
know the New
student.
Testament,
Now go
Old
get
Testament.
your white shirt and your tie and ride
Yeah.
your bike to the next house.
Now that you've
That's
conformed
seriously
to
what
our
it is.
customs, now you know. That
Yeah,
you've
and tell
conformed
them
to our
that knowledge. No
customs.
offense, by the way. It was an image. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We love you guys, but Jesus is God. But yes. Look, the thing is it's not just knowledge. It's not academia. Okay, I got to throw a plug in. This book right here, The Cure. It's by John Lynch, Bruce McConnell, Bill Thrall. The title of it is What If God Isn't Who You Think He Is, and Neither Are You? This book came into my life and it added a missing element. And I want to talk about that missing element. When what we just said, okay, my first discipleship experience was rooted in truth heavily, okay?
Well,
but unfortunately...
From the books that you were reading, you mean?
Yes. And from the relationship
from
I
your
was
father-in-law.
in.
And your father-in-law.
I'm so...
Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to sound... let's just say this. Sometimes, and it's really not a knock at all, me and him are really tight right now, but at the time, and we were tight then, but you know, relationships develop. Sometimes when you don't know someone very well, you can be head heavy with truth, right? One thing I missed was I got so wrapped up in the renewing of the mind that I didn't understand how to allow the things that were contradictive to who I am in Christ to come to the surface with someone else. And this book has radically altered that. Just for those of you who don't know, the book, The Cure, is about one of the biggest problems in the church right now. And, you know, the most recent study said that 78% of the church is not being discipled, okay? And the way that The Cure presents it is that when we have a system in the church that is set up about behavior modification and performance, where it's just about getting your behavior right and performing for God, and it's all about knowledge and not about experience, what happens is there becomes this social pressure where we feel like we have to wear a mask anytime we're around other believers because we don't trust them to know our garbage. Because why? Because if we're all in behavior modification together, then we're going to be judged for our poor performance, and we don't want to be judged. So we don't share what we go through. We don't share what's going on in our life that's contradictive to our new nature.
And it drives sin underground,
Yeah.
for sure. It creates a culture in which it's the church itself is shot through with undealt with sin because everybody hides it. And it's reinforced again because if somebody gets caught in their sin, everyone in the church knows about it. And they're removed from leadership and X, Y, and Z and all this different stuff happens. And it reinforces this idea that you better not get caught. You better keep wearing that mask and you better not let people know what's going on inside your head.
Right. And the reality is that the law causes sin to increase. Whenever we're in that kind of paradigm, which in the book it's called the room of good intentions, whenever we're in that paradigm, we're wearing a mask and actually our sin's getting worse because we're as sick as our secrets. But what this book helped me to understand is that God's grace is so profound that we're actually able to create a space, which the book calls the room of grace, where we're able to come in, take the mask off, and say, this is what is really going on in my life. But the beautiful thing is what these guys don't miss is that, thank you for sharing that. God forgives you, He loves you, and by the way, this is who you are. Even on your worst day, even in your worst behavior, God doesn't change His mind about you, and you are still a free new creation. And I just wanted to share that with our viewers. This book changed my life.
I know it revolutionized your life. I went through a similar process 10 years prior to that, and I got about halfway through that book. and I realized, I was like, this is just like Pink Floyd's The Wall.
Which is so cool that you drew the parallel, and these guys aren't Christian, Pink Floyd, I
don't recommend that movie. There's definitely some things in there that need to be censored, but the point of that movie is that through the trauma that happens in our life, the broken relationships that happen, is we create this wall. See, in there they talk about it a mask.
Yeah.
He just talks about it as being a wall.
Which is the same thing.
And ultimately, the only choice is complete isolation in your trauma or to tear down the wall. And so I remember that was my favorite movie for a long time. And
Wow.
I've probably watched it 60 or 70 times. I used to put it on when I was lonely, when I was wearing a mask, when I was behind that wall, when I was feeling as though that I had to perform all that stuff.
Right.
I put that movie on and I just experienced so much freedom through it.
Right.
Which I'll tell you, I mean, it's just one of those things that would I watch that movie now? No. Would I let my kids? No. But the Lord met me exactly where I was at. And that movie actually had a profound influence on me.
So if 78% of the church is not being discipled, okay, I think it's fair to say that our culture, not just, as a whole, our culture may not be as inviting as it needs to be. It may not be as grace-filled as it needs to be. Now what I can say, and me and you, we want to build that here. We're working on building that here more. But what I want to say is I've never grown more than when I was in a group of people who, to my shock, discovered things about me that I struggled with and said, we're never going to change our mind about you.
Amen.
That is insane. The world is so quick to say, you are what you do.
Yeah.
And religion says that. Yeah. But grace says you are never what you do. You are who the Father says you are. And the more that you get that in relationship with others, the more your behavior is going to match your being. Actually, William Paul Young, author of The Shack, he said wholeness is when the way of our being matches the truth of our being. And the process of transformation is becoming undiluted and realizing that there is a truth about me that's going to change the way that I behave.
And that's what, you say that, all of these different things happen as a result of 78 people not being discipled. 78% of people, yeah. But I see it as it creates if people are not being discipled consistently throughout their life, it creates a projection of maturity that's not really there. It's kind of like that mask that you keep talking about. Like, it gives this projection. I've been following Christ. I've been doing all the things. I've been attending church. I've been serving. I've been tithing. I've been doing all these things for 30 years, which means I'm automatically mature. I'm automatically supposed to be in a position of leadership. I'm automatically supposed to, and that's actually not the case if people aren't being discipled, and especially if they've been keeping their sin hidden for 30 plus years, and it's either getting worse or it's just undealt with.
And they lose hope that it'll ever change.
Yeah, or
it becomes something you embrace.
Yeah. Oh, that's just part of it. I'm going to read Romans 7.
I'll never get out of it.
I'm going to read Romans 7 to make me feel better about it and totally misinterpret what Paul is trying to say there.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what I've been seeing, a lot as I become a pastor and I step into these other churches and other areas, is I see people who are supposed to be mature, but they're really not mature.
How would you, so if there's people probably listening who are either not involved in the body of Christ, right? They're like me, maybe spent 8 years or more outside because they can't find a home here. Or there's people that are in the church and they're hiding, like massively hiding. They're just kind of like, get in as soon as it starts, get out as soon as it ends. Don't look at anyone in the eye.
Or even worse, get there early and just wear a mask for 6-7 hours. Get there early, serve, do all the things that you're supposed to be doing. Yeah. And just maintain that mask the whole time you're there, and then go home and take it off.
Now, what would we say to encourage them? And let me add it one thing. a caveat here. Well, actually, why don't I start? Because this involves the caveat. This involves the caveat. There is a place for discernment when discipleship is involved. Because if you open up to the wrong person who doesn't know how to handle your heart, you can get damaged.
And that'll actually cause you to reinforce this idea that you shouldn't take your mask off.
Right. So you need to be careful. Like, there is actually a place for some mask wearing when it comes to being in a room full of people that you don't know or trust yet.
I can't believe you just said that. That is contrary to everything that you have been telling me for years. I can't believe you just
You're
said that.
totally joking. You have to be. Okay. You scare me there. I'm like, really? No.
I'm just appalled
Oh,
that you
stop.
say...
Oh, stop it, dude. Look, here's the thing. Forget what he just said. That's inaccurate. No. There is a place for having your heart protected from people that you don't know yet.
Or people who have shown themselves to
be untrustworthy.
untrustworthy.
There's boundary here,
Absolutely.
okay? So don't take this and go, I'm just going to be an open book to every person that I meet. You know, people have to earn the right for you to take your mask off. And
Read Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend.
Okay. Who we actually saw at the conference in Cincinnati, which was cool. But here's the thing. I want to encourage you with this. For those of you who are discipling or in a position of discipleship in the church, my encouragement, first of all, would be for you to get this book and for you to read it with other people in your church who are discipling.
Potentially, hopefully, somebody who's actually read that, and
or maybe even read the book already.
I mean, you could read it, you know, without having ever read it before with some other folks, and you'll definitely get something out
exactly.
of it.
But if somebody has
more
read
helpful
it,
if you know somebody who's gone through that process.
Yes, but seriously, if you're discipling, my encouragement for you would be check your heart with God. Like, you know, am I judging people for their failures? Am I all about behavior modification and just learning how to better follow the rules? Am I not relational enough? Or am I relational enough? Like, you need to know those things. And am I providing a space where I can actually get to know people and invite them to be known by me? Am I earning their trust? Am I going to see them according to who they are in Jesus? Or am I going to see them according to their old nature? If you're in a position of discipleship, my encouragement would be for you to be inundated with grace yourself and learn how to do this yourself with other people. And then you're going to be more healthy and more able to meet other people when they come to you. So that would be my encouragement. Be inviting, be love-driven, be grace-driven. And if you're looking for discipleship, and you've been hurt or you're not sure what to do, I would encourage you to ask God to lead you to someone who is trustworthy and trust that he will do it. Every time I've ever asked God to do that, he has highlighted the right person. And then just take a step of faith, you know, and also you can read this book, preferably with people that
it's
that
not
already read
the
it.
only discipleship tool that's out there,
Nope.
by the way. I know that one has had a big impact on you, but there's literally dozens of discipleship tools that are unbelievably helpful and spirit-filled. I mean,
dude, name some of them, because I'm not just trying to prop this up, but this has just been something that's impacted us and people that I know very well. There's, of course, the Bible.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Right?
Well, no, I mean, I was just going to say that because even just getting back to like what does discipleship look like, there's many different ways that each person in each relationship is probably going to do a little bit differently, which is why when I lead discipleship groups, each one looks totally different. For some people, it's we're reading the scripture, we're poring over the scripture, we're getting into basics. And then for other people, it's iron sharpens iron, where maybe we're using some of the tenets of that book to take our masks off and actually be transparent with one another. Other people, will read, a book by C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity or something, and we'll kind of go through that together. So I really think that each relationship or each group is going to have its own flavor, and some people meet more frequently. Some people, I know a guy who every single morning they have a text group, and they just kind of share what the Lord's been speaking to them in their devotional time. And that's one of the ways that they can, you know, just sort of like, hey, I'm a busy person and I'm going to do this iron sharpens iron thing. So it looks different for a lot of people. And so, yeah, there's a ton of different resources and books. Some people like workbooks. There's a great one that it's called Disciple Making, How to Make Disciples Who Make Disciples. And it's a year-long process. It's a year-long sort of discipleship manual. I just want to add that in there because discipleship really does look different for each relationship and each group. The point is that it's a lifelong endeavor that everybody should be involved in, you know, throughout their life. And I will go through seasons where I'll be working really closely with a group or with an individual where I'm, you know, being poured into, or iron sharpens iron, or whatever it is. And then those relationships sometimes sort of, you know, fade into the distance or something. Somebody moves away and you're still close with them, but, you know, it's not like it was. And so that's when I begin that prayer. If I recognize in my life that I feel like I'm a little isolated, I feel like I don't have some of these closer relationships, that's when I begin that prayer where I say, Lord, bring me the next person to pour into my life. Bring me the next spiritual father. Bring me the next group that I can help grow.
Right.
And if when you ask that sincerely, it may not happen overnight, but I you know, within a matter of weeks or maybe a month or so, the Lord
Right.
always brings me into a scenario or a situation with
Right.
a person in which, you know, it becomes mutually beneficial type relationship where we're discipling one another, or maybe they're discipling me in a specific area in my life.
You know,
But it's a lifelong thing. So I have this like collection of either spiritual fathers in my life, or I have this collection of, you know, groups of people that I've been connected with over the years, and each one plays a different role in a different season.
yeah, it can't be all in a box.
Yeah.
And, you know, it probably should be mentioned too, for leaders and for pastors, this is probably the most difficult thing, because you learn quickly that it's hard to trust when you're in those positions. And I know when we went to the Cincinnati conference recently for Vineyard, I said, God, I need someone who's another pastor, another leader that I can grow closer to, that's ready for this type of relationship. You know, I felt like I needed just an extra support, and he perfectly led to a coffee time with a guy from Cleveland, and we're going to be meeting. And the more that I talked to him, the more I realized he's looking for this too.
Yeah.
How many people out there are looking for this, and they just don't know how to ask, they don't know how to say anything about it, and then you just hope that the Lord would at some point, you know, give them a sign and just tell them, like, this is exactly what you need. It's been standing right in front of you the whole time. So I was just wanting to say that.
Do you know of any good resources that would be helpful to help somebody along their journey? Any books?
I haven't really come across
any particular books that you've thought of?
I don't know, man. It's this one here. Yeah. But anyway. So yeah, go ahead.
I just want to share, you know, as a pastor, encountering people who I know are not being discipled, but whom love the Lord and have been faithful for so many years. It is one of the most heart-wrenching things to see them continuing to walk in maybe their old nature, certain aspects of their old nature, and almost as if they've given up relationship, almost as if they've given up hope that they could have one of these discipleship type relationships, or that it would make any kind of a difference, or, you know, that they've just gotten themselves so thick into this Romans 7 paradigm where they believe that Romans 7 justifies sin and mask wearing and all this stuff, and especially when it's people that I've known for years that I love. It is one of the most heart-wrenching things. And it's one of the reasons that I believe so strongly in discipleship, because it really is the difference between, I would say, freedom and bondage. And And to see people I know and love still walking around in bondage when they have the key practically hanging around their own neck is one of the most heart-wrenching things as a pastor. And then it becomes also where you're trying to like have these conversations where you're trying to encourage them. I preach it from the pulpit. I talk to them over coffee about it, or we shoot a podcast about it, and all of it's aimed at like this is an essential foundational part of Christianity. Right. That helps you truly get closer to our fellow man and to the Father in a way that nothing else could.
Yeah.
And to see people still walk away from that is baffling and heartbreaking to me. But just taking a leap of faith and taking a little risk with one of those, people who might just be safe can totally change your entire life.
Yeah. There's hope.
Yeah.
But we have to take the first step.
Yeah.
You got to take. So if you're in our church and you're not getting discipled, please take a step.
Yeah.
Like, we have people here who are ready for you, actually, because we've been doing it ourselves. And take that step. And if you're somewhere else, pray about it, find somebody. It could change your life.
Honestly, if this is going out, and there's people online who are looking for discipleship, I mean, you could reach out to one of us. You could reach out to our social media accounts, or even our church website, communityvineyard.org, even Vineyard USA.
Yeah, they have good resources.
They have some good resources. They have a whole tab where it's find a church.
Yeah.
And get out there and actually take a step and do something. Because it really it changes this thing called Christianity. And I think that if you want revival, it starts with you. A lot of churches across America pray for revival, and they have whole sermon series and everything where they're talking about revival. But it really begins with the individual. And if you want revival in the nation, it begins in your own heart. And that's usually only achieved through discipleship.